policies beside the CPF do you want to champion in Parliament?
I personally have been writing on education, so I believe education, healthcare, wages, income inequality. So for me, education, at least I believe that class sizes should be reduced. The workload of teachers should be reduced because there's too much administrative work. And then for special needs education, I believe it has to be integrated into the system. Streaming examinations, I believe, has to be abolished at a younger age because it causes stress first and foremost, but it also reduces risk taking. But I'm talking about schools in general because I feel that it is not conducive for us to have streaming examination, but all this is just focused on causing people to study for the sake of studying and passing examinations, but it doesn't allow them to want to think critically or think out of the box. Or because many people would then think, I do not want to read a book outside of school. I do not, and that's what I've heard. So when I went to Norway, I liked the system where students in class, they would just challenge the teacher. In the textbook, if they don't like it, they'll just challenge the teacher. And I think it's good because right now our workforce, we don't have a tendency to challenge. So we need to have a system where we feel that we are confident enough to do so that when we go out to work, we are willing to take risks. And I think that's not happening.
But how do you propose that we reduce the administrative workload on teachers? Like right now, besides teaching, they have to do the marking, they have to do overseas CCAs, they have to do admin work, plan for outings, field trips. So how do you propose that?
One thing is increase the investment in education because we spend the lowest in education among the developed countries. Also, the resources are unequally distributed. So if we can increase the expenditure by also having more teachers, this will allow the class sizes to be lessened, and this will allow them to focus more on the students. Naturally, the administrative work will also be decreased. So, and also when we increase the expenditure for education, this will also allow the poorer schools or the less, other schools to also get more resources and allow them to then be more equal in that sense.
I think this is true because I'm actually from a neighborhood school, but I did well on my O-levels. We got into RI. So I feel that there's really a big difference between like my secondary school and where I am now. So I think resources can be more evenly distributed, I guess.
Yeah, and it's the PISA ranking shows that Singapore has one of the more unequal distribution of resources.
But even if we give our schools more money, do you think that it will really solve the problem? Because like for the better schools, we have better alumni, we have better access to resources. Like I'll say for NJ, we get access to talk to our more prestigious alumni like ministers and stuff. But you don't get to see that in those lower tier and junior colleges.
I think, of course, the education system, I personally think that we cannot just look at the education system as itself because the system as a whole, it values students who come out from certain schools. So therefore, it breeds a certain, no judgment, that's just how it works. It breeds a certain elitism that causes only certain schools to be able to move forward. Also because of streaming, it causes certain students to be streamed into certain schools and it segregates the system. So if we are able to ensure that at least resources are allocated more equally and we reduce the streaming at a younger age and we allow students to be able, because when class sizes reduce and we're able to allow teachers to focus more on the students, they will be able to develop at a younger age. Then will they therefore not do well academically? They might not. The other thing is some of them feel that they cannot do well academically and then they are stuck. And then they are left with nothing to do or they go to IT, for example. And I don't think that this is a very healthy system because if you look at Norway, polytechnics, universities are equal. Also, if you go to a polytechnic, you can go to a polytechnic university. So eventually you get the same pay in a sense. So wage gap is quite equal. And if you eventually want to choose a leader or want to choose a person who is to run a country or to run a company, you can choose from a broad spectrum and it's not just from particular schools. Of course, it might not feel comfortable for certain schools if that happens, but a more equal society allows for many social benefits, more trust among the people, people who are happier, people who have, what are all those research that I saw? People who have higher self-esteem, people who do not think that they are better than one another. So we are more willing to help one another and our society will grow as a whole. So for me, fundamentally, the education system needs a reform. And then this will allow, of course, then there needs to be wage reform. And how we look for workers has to then be not so academically based. And with more risk-taking, it allows for more creative society and more creative economy.
So do you have any comments on the current quality of teachers?
I think what happens now is that because teachers are so stressed out, they tend to leave the education system quite early, and then they decide to be tuition teachers because they get higher pay, or they might even focus on being tuition teachers out of school instead of teach in school. So I think the system has been lopsided because first the stress, and then second the pay that they can get outside. If we can only reform the system to smaller class sizes, etc., this will then ensure that teachers will go back to the fundamental basics of teaching students. And do we need tuition when we have a higher quality education in school? We might not. Yeah.
But right now, I think the current problem with like changing the salaries of teachers or any other civil servants is because like across the civil service there's a certain salary pegged to each grade. So if we like adjust the salaries of teachers, wouldn't we need to adjust the salary across the civil service?
I would say though that I believe that each in a job industry they should have their own labour union so that they can decide how salaries should be pegged for themselves. So cleaners, taxi drivers, teachers. I personally think that that's a healthier way to do it than to have someone set a level. Because right now the wages across the board, even for the civil service, compared to the cost of living in Singapore, is still not enough or adequate to not just have a basic living, but to be able to live, to enjoy hobbies and all that. So I think the problem in Singapore is businesses have control, and the government controls the businesses, and they can profit. So from a demand side, supply side, demand, workers are providing supply. So from a business perspective, they get to control how much they want to earn, how much they depress the wages of workers. But then for workers, there's no union, no control, no bargaining power, because they are all individuals without a labour union to back them up. So if you are able to do that, at least there's some balance, then it will not just tip our system into a lopsided way where there's such a huge percent profit, but then this will take away the wages of workers, depress the wages. And if we are able to do that, then at least wages can increase. Profits will still be there, but at least the system will be a bit more balanced. Yeah.
So like, what do you think of the government like giving scholarships to the neighbouring students? I think this policy should actually continue or modify for people.
I personally think that is okay, but if they want to invest in foreign students, then first and foremost, you have responsibility to your citizens, and first and foremost you should invest in Singaporeans. The problem with the scholarship for foreign students, I understand that foreign students are abusing it because they know that if you guys are going to pay me anyway, I'm just going to wait for you to give me a scholarship. If you don't, then I'll just go somewhere else. So it's prone to abuse because then you get. I understand that it's not the top tier students who come because they can afford to go somewhere else and they didn't leave you. And of course, we are still getting students who are good because based on the results, they still get a lot more second half of class honors. But that's not to say that Singaporeans cannot do that. I think academic results are not everything. So if we want to invest, at least invest in our students first, and then if we have more, then we can always help students from another country, and that will still add to our workforce in the future. I think that's fine. Just that my main bugbear is that take care of Singaporeans first before, because unless Singaporeans are earning such high salaries that they do not need scholarships, but then they are not. Yeah, so it's too unequal, and in fact it then makes it better for the foreigner, which is not a xenophobic thing, but it's just unequal. It's not good for society in the long run.
So do you think we should get like foreigners to be teachers in our education system?
I think that question though for me is broad-based. We need to ensure Singaporeans get a job. So as long as Singaporeans have a job and we still have that excess capacity, then I think that's okay. And if we pay different jobs, for example, if we pay teachers a sufficient salary, then more and more Singaporeans might want to take up teaching, and we might not then face the problem of having not enough teachers. The problem I feel is, you need to ensure that Singaporeans are able to get a job, because to be honest, Singapore is a city, and we do need. That's my personal point of view. We do need foreign labour to come in, but the problem is we are just adding in labour for the sake of profit and GDP growth without actually looking at whether they are needed at this point. So I mean, for example, some companies, they're just bringing in foreigners because, instead of increasing productivity, investing in technology or upscaling the workers, I'll just bring in workers as and when I need. Then it's just creating a pool of labor, but it doesn't increase the productivity, it doesn't increase the innovation. If we are able to at least increase wages, think about how to allow each worker to be more productive, to add more value to work, then we are able to then bring in fewer workers. We will be able to sustain the economy still, like how Norway, Sweden does it.
But then there's like, for example, like the SMEs, the F&B industry, which really like no Singaporeans would want to take up those jobs because, like, for example, F&B, right? For management entry level like trainee, for example, you earn only about 1.6k, and then the working hours are like from the opening hours to closing hours, and it's 6 days a week. So Singaporeans won't take up that kind of job, and it's very hard for F&B, like those small chains, to actually find Singaporeans to work there for them, whether like full time or part time. So I see like many opposition wants to press to stop foreign workers from coming in, or stop, or like reduce it. But is there like a better way for us to manage this foreign worker thing, like instead of just like totally cut off or like limit it generally?
I feel that wages are too low for because some people think that wages need to be as low as a minimum should be about 2,000 for Singaporeans. So I understand why Singaporeans won't take up such jobs. If you look at Australia, which has a similar cost of living and in fact could be even cheaper in some cases, they have a minimum wage of 3,000 and work hours are short. They have a labour union which protects the workers. I think what should happen in Singapore is that rents should be reduced so that at least businesses and SMEs have more room to play with their salaries, which they can then increase the salaries of the workers. And once that happens, technically based on research, productivity should go up, and therefore you will need fewer workers. And assuming that across the board in Singapore, wages go up, work hours are reduced, people have more time for themselves. When you go to a cafe, the waiter does not need to spend as much time with you because you'll be quite able to serve yourself, and you will have technology to help you. So then that reduces workload. That also allows workers to earn more. That allows companies to still make profits because rents are low. The situation now is very lopsided because companies, SMEs have to pay too high rents that they have not enough to pay workers. And because of the foreign worker levies and because of all the costs they have to send their workers to, they still have to pay a lot of money on top of the workers' wages into foreign worker levies. And then this creates a situation where the government profits and the government earns a lot of money. But SMEs still make profits, but the ones that are hurting are workers. And I would say that once we are able to have a system that allows workers to bargain for their own salaries, minimum wage for a start, this would at least get more Singaporeans back into the workforce in these industries as well. I think another problem is the government over the past few decades have said, you should be a doctor because that's a good job, you should be an engineer, and therefore they would then only focus on all this and increase the wages for certain sectors, and the wages for all this keep going up higher and higher. But for the rest, because of how this systematically you institutionalize wage growth for a certain sector, you causes wage to be depressed for some. This will cause discrimination after one, social discrimination, and therefore I wouldn't want to take up these jobs because first I don't get paid well, and then second I am economically and socially discriminated. So I think our system is not naturally like that. We created this system which is discriminatory, and if you want to reverse the system, it is to reform the education system, increase wages, have minimum wage, ensure labour unions are there, so that at least wages are uplifted and we can have more equal society. Education system that is reformed and more equal will, in the long term, will produce a more equal society.
Right now, the government promotes the progressive wage system. Wouldn't it be better if there's a constant progression in your wage, since that it will serve as incentive to be more productive and continue doing your work hard? But if you set a minimum wage, wouldn't it give the opportunity to employer to just say I just give you this minimum wage and then I can don't increase it over time?
I think regardless of what is called minimum wage or progressive wage, I think the first thing that we need to do is to calculate a living what is needed for Singaporeans to have. So poverty line, we need to define the poverty line to say what is the minimum that Singaporeans should have. Some people estimate that this is as high as 2,000. So if that's the case, then whether it's progressive wage model, whether it's minimum wage, it should be set at 2,000. So progressive wage model now is set at 1,000 for cleaners, 1,001 for security guards. But you need to be promoted before you get a higher wage. And 1,000 or 1,001 is too low for people to have enough. So if the government so believe in a progressive wage model, and that's fine, it should be set at a wage that is enough, so 2,000 or 1,005 plus a lot of health and education subsidies to ensure that it tops up. And then therefore, if it's progressive, that's fine. One thing that's the main bugbear I don't like of the progressive wage model, because the wage limit is set too low. And the other thing is, workers who work in a certain industry naturally will be promoted if they're good enough. So to say that a progressive wage model will help to engineer that, I think it's just saying that the system is already there. I'm gonna put a name to it, progressive wage model, and ta-da! But the truth is nothing changes, because you know what, cleaners were earning $1,000. Actually, most of them were earning $800, and I'm just gonna top it up by $200. Progressive wage model, but it's not real, because you haven't addressed the fundamental question of why workers don't earn enough. And that model doesn't earn enough. How many cleaners are going to become supervisors? Not everyone can become a supervisor. So if not everyone can do that, then at least the base wage that you have should be high enough, really to ensure that people have enough to use. Otherwise, if you're telling them that you don't have enough to use, there's no way I can be self-reliant. Yeah, and I've met too many low-income families who are paid so low that they think, I'm so useless, maybe this is my fate, that I'm not good enough, and it doesn't matter, no one cares about me. And that's not the case, you see. The government tells them that, but that's not true. The problem is, in Singapore, there's no strong labour unions, the government controls everything. You don't get a voice because you are pushed out, and the government pushes you out, and that's not right for the government to do that. Yeah. Sorry.
Nothing to say.
But in the past, I bought into the government's system. It was only when I started researching and then when I started looking at how other countries do it, that I realized, not right. You cannot treat your people like that. You cannot tell them to be self-reliant and then you tell them, I'm going to not give you high enough wages, I'm not going to spend enough on health and education, and then you rely on yourself. And then when you don't have enough, beg me. So, you don't do that to a citizen. It's not right. Yeah.
So do you agree on the government's expenditure on the new policy SkillFuture? Do you think that it's necessary and it actually helps the workers?
I think SkillFuture it's like you have a problem and then you create another program to say, I'm going to fix the problem, without fundamentally addressing what the problem is. The problem is workers' wages are low. There's streaming that causes only a certain pool of students to go into university, a certain pool to go into polytechnic and IT. And therefore you artificially segregate them, and then you artificially segregate their wages. So obviously polytechnic students and ITs are never going to get high enough wages, because first you stream them, and then second you peg them to S-Pass, E-Pass, Work Pass. You are creating a system that institutionalizes inequality, and then you create a SkillFuture, and then you say, I'm going to give you more skills, and that should help you to have more skills. But that's not going to happen, because unless you increase their wages, unless you allow them to unionize and have higher wages, unless you stop the streaming, and unless you say, regardless of where you go to, it's more or less, I wouldn't say that I would discriminate against you. So the problem with the SkillFuture is it doesn't talk about wages. It just says, I'm going to increase your skills. By right, you will have higher wages. But that's not going to happen. What the government should do is really to reform the education system, look at how to make it more equal, like what we talked about just now, and then to reform wages to ensure that you don't tag it to such artificial and structured limits that prevent people from being able to have more mobility. And then if the government is sincere about SkillFuture increasing the wages of Singaporeans, then increase the wages of the polytechnic and IT students, just increase it. I think the whole SkillFuture is another propaganda and gimmick to let people have the impression that the government wants to do something again, without actually fundamentally addressing what the root cause of the problem is.
But actually, wouldn't this streaming, if you call it, be necessary? Because in economics, there's a demand and supply system. So if we let everyone go to university, then there'll be like a very huge supply, and that will drop the prices, or in this case, salaries of a university graduate. So don't you think that will happen?
Well, I think we can't just look at Singaporeans or citizens or people as economic digits. We have to look at how much we think they need to they need to have in order to survive. And whether you're a university student, a polytechnic student, IT students, you need an amount to survive. And not just to survive, but to have enough to buy an iPhone. not to say that everyone needs to do that, but sometimes if a country is rich enough to do that, you have to at least invest it back to your people and not just take it and then, benefit yourself. I think though your question, what was your question again? I had something to add on.
I'm talking about the demand supply system. So if we say like everyone gets to go to university, you create an oversupply.
Oh, yeah. I feel that, I cannot just tell the person in a low income family or IT that, there's a demand supply problem and I'm not going to let you go to university because I think that you're not smart enough. But that's not right as a government to do that, because your role as a government is to ensure that everyone has equal access or equal opportunities to get there. And then whether or not they get there, that's up to them after that. But you need to at least ensure that there's resources to ensure everyone gets there. And the other thing is, even if they decide not to go to university or they are not academically inclined to do that, then at least they should be able to earn a wage that's still sufficient. Because right now we're saying if you don't go to university, you don't get a starting wage of 3,000. You get a starting wage of $1,300. But you're telling people, you're from IT, you're too bad and I'm not going to increase your wages. So if we do not want people to go into universities, or we do not believe that everyone needs to go, we should at least create an equal platform. And even if you decide not to, you should earn enough wages that allow you to be able to choose not to go to university, but still be able to earn enough to function adequately in the country. And the system now it doesn't allow that. Yeah. So for me, fundamentally, the government has a responsibility to take care of its people, and the government cannot be judgmental and say that and uphold an elite system that causes some to get ahead but not the rest, because that's not the government's role to do that. And it's not to judge the elite system or not, it's just to say that the government has a wider responsibility than to only believe in a certain elite pathway that would necessarily marginalize the rest of Singaporeans. And then really in the long term, if you have an unequal society, a NASA study has shown, funded by NASA, has shown that all unequal societies eventually collapse. Because an elite who is too up there will no longer align with the problems of the poor and the middle income. They will keep protecting themselves, siphon off too much of the money away from themselves, and when eventually there's too little for those at the bottom, they will riot, they will break out, and if people do not have the critical thinking to manage the situation, they're just going to get angry and the whole society will collapse. As much as the PAP want to fearmonger to say, if the opposition comes into power, it will collapse, the likelihood of Singapore collapsing under the PAP is even higher because of how they're entrenching the inequality. Yeah.
So you believe that will happen in Singapore?
I wouldn't say that will happen or not, because I cannot speculate, but based on what history has shown, that happens because of how societies eventually like Rome.
You mean like other societies?
Yeah, so that is a high possibility.
So about social mobility, I think it's a problem in Singapore.
It is a problem. It is a problem in Singapore because Tharman released a set of stats to say social mobility is high, but similarly there are other stats that shows that social mobility is not high.
So which one is the real one?
I think social mobility, the basis of social mobility eventually is you need to ensure that people have earn enough, and then they are able to access education so that they are able to advance, they're able to access healthcare so that they are able to take care of themselves, be productive, and then invest back into the economy. So all these things need to be there, and then when you ensure that you have a system that protects people's wages, allow them to have access to education and healthcare, naturally social mobility should be there. And I think if you would ask me, I would think social mobility is low, obviously because of the lack of investment in healthcare, education, and the low wages. Yeah, so it has to impede on social mobility. Yeah. But again, I'm not saying this because we need to be a liberal leftist. We really need to invest in the people. If we don't invest, at some point, you cannot have just a pool of people who get ahead and then the rest of them don't. It's not a sustainable system for the country. Yes, it's just not.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I think you're a very insightful person.
Oh no, that's because I am unemployed and I have a lot of time to look at
statistics. Really? I've been following your blog, two of them.
Oh, okay. One which is not so updated anymore.
Which doesn't matter. Still read GP knowledge.
Oh, okay.
The opposition, there are some opposition parties who also say that the country shouldn't be ruled by the aristocrats like the PAP. So, but I think we actually need some form of aristocrats to rule us because they're actually kind of capable, and the whole reason that we have leaders is so that we have more capable people who are able to lead us. So do you agree with
I personally think that anyone can be in parliament as long as first they have the heart, second they have the ability to research, third they have the ability to debate, fourth they have the ability to synthesize information and put them together and understand what needs to be done. And then they also need to be able to understand and talk to people and understand that these are the problems, this is what research says, this is how I should look at things. This is what the proposals should be, and then you as citizens have the democratic right to then choose what is the best way to do it. And of course then there needs to be independent media and ongoing discussions that allow people to then refine their ideas and realize what's the best policy that needs to be done. So even a cleaner taxi driver can do that as long as they have the right skill sets, to do that. The problem in Singapore is we don't expect cleaners and taxi drivers to have that because the education system in the first place is unequal and does not allow that to happen. So if I am in a poorer school, I'm in an IT EM3, I would think that I'm not good enough, I'm a lousy student and I'm never going to be that. So it creates that artificial stagnation of the mind that causes people to think, I'm never going to be good. But you have a system in, say, in the Nordic countries where people are all educated and where, of course, not everyone is equally educated, but the education level, I would say, and the willingness to contribute and think would be higher. And therefore, we have a wider pool of people to select from and wider pool of people who can go into parliament to represent themselves and the people. And because media is free, of course, some politicians are stupid, whether from the aristocrats or whether from anywhere. That happens, but that is why you need a system of checks and balances, and that's why you need different free media. You need academics to be free, so that there's always this. There's always it's not just government and parliament that should be the final be all and say and all. Yeah. And I think we are now in a situation where we think that Singapore and the system that we have is the only way it should be, when there are many other systems and many other ways and more equal ways that the country can be run. Yeah. But the problem is, of course, PAP is the only one in power, and therefore we cannot imagine that other future because there's no alternate future that the PAP allows us to imagine, and that forces us to be cooped up, and that's not healthy because in the long term, then we're only always going to think about this one pathway and this one solution when there are actually multiple pathways. And for me itself, it's a challenge for me to break out because in the past I was part of the system, NUS, So how do you break out of that? Yeah, and it's a constant, effort to break out and to learn.
Actually, what are the challenges that you face as an opposition candidate? Like, do you face any discrimination or attacks from the? Yeah.
I think first and foremost, the government is biased. The media is obviously biased towards the government. The election itself is biased. 9 days of campaigning is very expensive. You have to pay $14,500 per person, when it should actually everyone should have the right to run. The government gerrymanders. The government has the money. It holds the resources, and then it says that I'm going to buy your votes. I'm going to upgrade I'm going to build a swimming pool. So there's all this unevenness because the PAP abuses that power, and they believe that they are the government. They are Singapore. They are. Without me, you will die. But that's not the case because you took all my money. Of course, you're gonna and because there's no checks and balances, it causes the abuse of power to get on, and it legitimizes and legalizes that abuse of power without effective questioning from the media or even from academics. And it entrenches an unequal system which people take to be natural when it's not. The opposition is on a very uneven playing field because even if you have the same degree, same masters as another PAP candidate, people will judge you on a higher path because of how the PAP has set the propaganda that the opposition is not good enough, they're mad, So it's a very uneven playing field. Okay.
I think that's a very long talk. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you. Thanks for coming.
All the best.
All the best.
Okay, thank you.
加油。
Wow, I nearly cry or something. I want to take photo. Ask In, you will help us take.
We will find a light spot.
What time is it now?
Use the
It's good. It's good because you told me to natural and then
Oh yeah, Ben.